Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be talking about a very important topic, something that Pakistan has been dealing with for quite some time now, and has been focused on talks and any other measures regarding this particular issue, which is, of course, the increase in terrorist spikes throughout the country and in specific parts as well. And we've seen since the Taliban came into power into Afghanistan that we had hoped that this would help us, facilitate us in the talks, but we haven't really seen any breakthrough in our talks with the TTP, and we've seen an increase in terror incidents within our own country as well. And we have, in a recent incident, lost 4 soldiers who got martyred in a suicide blast at a military convoy in the Mir Ali area of KP's North Waziristan district. This has been confirmed by the ISPR, and of course messages have been pouring in from the President and the Prime Minister as well, paying rich tributes to the martyred soldiers, expressing their grief and paying condolences to the bereaved families, and of course condemning this particular incident. But it's not the first, and we hopefully it may be the last, but we haven't really seen any sort of hope coming in from the TTP and the talks that have been continuing. We've seen recently also there was an entire delegation of religious scholars that also went in. We've taken in facilitation from the Taliban regime in Afghanistan as well. However, the talks haven't really seen any sort of a breakthrough, and we've also seen that senior TTP leader Umar Khalid Khorasani and 2 other members of the banned outfit were killed in a roadside bomb attack in Afghanistan on Monday, and this has been confirmed by the Taliban spokesman as well. Over the years, there have been other killings as well regarding the TTP leaders, but of course this is also a big blow to the talks between the TTP and Pakistan as well, and what is going to now continue or evolve in terms of that, and whether or not we're going to be seeing any sort of restarting of this issue and how it's going to impact our peace talks as well. So we're going to be focusing our show on that, talking not just what is going on in Afghanistan with regards to this outfit, but also what Pakistan and its own measures are going to be, how many rounds of these talks are we going to see or witness before we have any change of strategy, whether or not there is any hope of breakthrough in these talks, and what does it mean when we talk about senior TTP leaders being killed in Afghanistan, especially Umar's death, and how that's going to impact the talks and their future. So this is going to be our segment of the show today, and we're going to be focusing all of it on that. And for this and more, of course, we've been joined as always in the studios by Raja Faisal and not by Farrukh Pitafi, but we hope that he is well, and we miss him. He was unable to attend the show today due to personal reasons, but we're going to be seeing him very soon. We have been joined instead by a very special guest, Mr. Ehsanullah Tipu Masood, who's a journalist. He's joined us. Thank you very much for joining us in the studios. And we've also been joined by our guests online. We've been joined by Tom O'Connor, senior foreign policy writer at Newsweek, and Mr. Tariq Faradi, and Afghan affairs expert, both regulars at our show. So welcome to the debate. I'll start with you, Faisal. When we talk about this particular issue, of course, we've been talking about the TTP and its talks, and of course Pakistan's stance on this as well, and we've been talking about how we really haven't seen much progress on that. We've seen a recent attack once again, and we've seen the killing of a senior TTP leader as well, which of course will have a huge impact on the talks with TTP. What do you make of these developments?
Sana, first of all, let me talk about Khalid Khorasani. He is considered as someone who was very close to RAW, who was being considered as someone who gets funding and arranges funding from RAW, and of course he was very important for TTP. His obviously killing is a sort of a very good step forward for Pakistan in terms of war on terror, and I think it was a job very well done. Along with him, obviously 3 others who got killed in the same incident. It was all of them 3 were very important for TTP once again. If we talk about the talks, of course Pakistan emphasized that Pakistan wanted to get to a solution without war, without any battles being fought against TTP, because Pakistan wanted a peaceful solution to all of the problems. But now, of course, as we can see, the TTP is not in favor of talks, because their demands are that they want to take all of the steps which were taken by Pakistan to with a reversal to the same position where it used to be, and they wanted penetration within Swat, within Fatah area, and then they wanted Fatah area again becoming Fatah area, not under the provincial government of KP. So I think it is impossible to negotiate with TTP, and right now it is time that Pakistan has to go for a full-fledged battle against them, because if Pakistan is the only side which is willing to negotiate peace through talks, then not the TTP, then I think there is no point of talking with them.
All right, and Faisal, you say it's a job well done, and I can understand the sentiment, but I also want to understand, Mr. Hassan, the impact it's going to have on the overall strategy or measures that we're going to be taking in. Of course, we're talking about peaceful talks, but at the same time, if we're going to be also celebrating such incidents, then how is our strategy going to be reconciled?
I think we should be, very careful, like claiming this date it was done by Pakistan or by Pakistani security agencies, because as per my information, talks are very much there, so ceasefire is very much there, and I think assassination or killing of Khorasani at this moment have not derailed the peace process. So I think the peace talks should be given a chance. If it can cause or it can bring peace in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, especially the Pakistani tribal region. And as far as Khorasani is concerned, no doubt he was a very senior member of TTP. He was among the founding members of TTP, and even before 9/11, he was part of Kashmiri-linked militant groups in Pakistan. So he was a very key figure, and not only him. Another two guys like Hafiz Daulat Khan, he also got killed along with Khorasani, and Mullah Hassan hailing from Swat Valley. So these two guys, they were also very prominent, and especially Hafiz Daulat Khan, he was the one who was part of that faction of TTP who created Daesh Khorasan. So I think killing of Khalid Khorasani is something very big, or it's a big blow to the TTP. And especially today when TTP released a statement about the assassination of Khalid Khorasani, so we were expecting that they would announce an end to the ceasefire, and they might also announce an end to the peace process, but we didn't see any such thing in the statement. So this shows that peace talks are very much there, and ceasefire is still intact.
Right. Mr. Faradi, of course, we have seen the TTP also urging the Taliban in Afghanistan to further investigate this incident as well. I also want to understand what sort of an impact it's going to have in Afghanistan as well, and of course the role that the Taliban regime has been playing in the talks between the TTP and Pakistan. Is there more to the picture than we're seeing? Because of course Khalid Khorasani was an important figure. He's recently been meeting and has recently met teams from Pakistan as well, religious scholars as well. Is there something else that's going on?
Well, the current Taliban government in Afghanistan is playing a double game with Pakistan in terms of saying, please come and negotiate with these guys, but they are not encouraging the TTP to conclude anything. They are not putting the TTP under any type of pressure to conclude any peace, basically. The TTP feels up to a couple of days ago were welcome in Afghanistan by the government. The people of Afghanistan who see the TTP as very much unwanted guests that create problems for Afghanistan, and certainly these people want to see Talibanism in Pakistan. So what they want is to reverse the merger of Fatah, and they want to come back with their Kalashnikov to Pakistan and dictate the rule of Talibanism first in their own region and maybe someday in Islamabad. It's very dangerous. Negotiations with these people will not yield anything. They have to be split up between those who want to come back peacefully without arms. And for those who stay in Afghanistan, pressure needs on Taliban to happen to disarm them in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Tom, if you allow me, if we talk about TTP, of course, we know that TTP is having good relations with Taliban. At the same time, a few of the factions of TTP, they have very good relations and at very good terms with IS Khorasan as well, ISIS Khorasan. So can we say that TTP, I mean, if Pakistan is going against them, then Americans obviously they are against ISIS Khorasan, they are against TTP, they are against the terrorism of all of its kinds. Why can't we see Taliban helping Pakistan out in terms of TTP, knowing the fact that few of the factions of TTP, they are getting catered by ISIS Khorasan in Nangarhar and Kunar province?
Well, this is the difficult position that the Taliban in Afghanistan has been in since taking over the country, is that essentially now being charged with ruling the country, they want to pursue their own agenda, and they do want to take control of security forces. They want to ensure security in the country and stamp out instability. But by cracking down, they risk defections within their own ranks. They risk being labeled as collaborators with international powers such as the United States, which has sought a limited cooperation with the Taliban against other groups such as Al-Qaeda, such as Daesh, as you mentioned, TTP to some extent, or working with Pakistan, which of course has tried to forge some sort of security relationship with the Taliban and had some prior to the takeover. Now, since taking over, we've seen the Taliban wanting now to act as more of an independent actor, trying to balance its relations with not only neighboring countries, but also competing groups within Afghanistan itself. So right now, as was mentioned earlier in the show, we are seeing the Taliban play sort of a double game here, wanting to engage in what appears to be good faith with Pakistan, but also not wanting to crack down too hard on TTP, knowing the relationships historically that it's had with its own group and the TTP and other militant groups in the region. So I think the Taliban is trying to play very careful here.
Right. Mr. Farhadi, when we talk about Khalid Khorasani's killing and of course the kind of repercussions that's going to have, or not just of the TTP, but of course the peace talks as well, do you think that this is something that needs to be investigated or can actually be investigated by the Taliban regime in Afghanistan? Because the TTP also keeps referring to spies who need to be unearthed by these investigations. Can the spies are they limited to just in Afghanistan, or do they go beyond that?
Well, first of all, I've seen some messages from the TTP telling the Taliban in the days where you had to fight the Americans, we gave you refuge, and now you are not able to protect our leaders. So there is some tension now between TTP and Taliban. As far as investigations, I'm old enough to know that investigations never conclude anything in Afghanistan before, right. Now. So when the Taliban or even the previous governments were saying we are going to investigate this, it means that you can wait for 50 years.
Right, and the tension that you speak of course, I can understand how it's coming through. But when we talk about the Taliban regime, there's of course a lot of other groups within Afghanistan as well that we keep pointing towards in terms of a threat to the Afghanistan regime, and then of course outside Afghanistan to Pakistan as well. And we were even though there was a lot of mistrust, still relying on the facilitation that the Taliban regime was providing in Afghanistan for these talks. Do you think that we can no longer look at the Taliban regime in Afghanistan for any sort of facilitation?
The Taliban will still welcome Pakistani delegations to come to talk to TTP. If TTP is willing to come back soon to the table, I think in the end they will come back. Or part of them will come back, or maybe there will be a split in TTP. But the Taliban are not putting the TTP under pressure to conclude anything. Right now they have a lot of guest houses. They have access to state funding, customs revenues. It doesn't cost them much to put up the TTP leaders and guest houses and the fighters wherever they are. That's not a problem, but in fact it's a problem for the people of Afghanistan because it perpetuates a situation of instability along the border with Pakistan. It's a problem for Pakistan because in the end these people are staying in Afghanistan, but their target is Pakistan, and it has to go through all the influence that Pakistan has on Taliban to disarm the TTP and say, look, if you want to go back in Pakistan, you can go back, but you have to leave your guns here.
Yeah, Ehsan, I wanted to come towards you. As you know, ground realities very well of KPK. Plus, if we talk about ISIS Khorasan and if we talk about TTP, you are very well aware of their tactics as well and their good relationship to each other as well. Just wanted to know, do you think that in coming future we might see TTP as an extension of ISIS Khorasan, not the Taliban, but the ISIS Khorasan extension in Pakistan, because their stance is quite similar to ISIS Khorasan?
Yes, this is very much possible, and especially after the killing of Umar Khalid Khorasani. I think the current TTP Amir Mufti Nur Wali Masood, he is currently very much under pressure from different factions of TTP, because TTP is an umbrella organization of almost 19 groups and other senior commanders of the TTP, and those commanders, especially the radical elements within TTP, they can switch sides to ISKP, and ISKP has already launched a propaganda accusing Afghan Taliban and Pakistani government for assassination of like Ayman al-Zawahiri, TTP senior commanders. And also I want to add one thing, that currently the Afghan Interior Minister, he is under immense pressure because he was the one who protected those guys from the TTP and from Al-Qaeda, and he was hosting, protecting them. And like just a week ago, Al-Qaeda leader got killed in Kabul. Then another senior TTP commander got killed in Kunad, Mullah Uqabi Bajawadi. And yesterday, these three senior TTP commanders got killed. So he is also under immense pressure. And I think these killings can also create internal rifts within the Afghan Taliban.
Yeah.
So that's why, Pakistani government, especially the security agencies who are involved in this peace process, they should also be very much sensitive and careful, because as I said earlier, that we should give a chance to this peace process, and if it can bring peace in the region, especially in the tribal region and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
Right, Mr. Ehsan, let me also qualify that and try to understand that when we talk about giving peace a chance, how many chances really are we giving? Because there's been a lot of round of talks and we really haven't seen any progress. We haven't really seen any hope for any progress also. So how long are we going to continue this for, or what is going to be the point where we change?
Yes, exactly. This is not happening for the first time. We had, a series of peace talks with the TTP, and almost, I think, 7 peace treaties have been signed with the TTP in the past as well. And unfortunately, all those peace deals got collapsed within a week or within a month. And then ultimately, Pakistani government launched military operations against the TTP at that time. But I think that the current peace process has one element which can play a very pivotal role and positive role, and that is mediation from Afghan Taliban, especially from Sirajuddin Haqqani, because Sirajuddin Haqqani has a very strong influence on TTP since beginning. They were hosting each other, they were protecting each other in South Waziristan, North Waziristan, and the same thing was today mentioned in TTP statement as well, that we were the ones who protected you, we hosted you, and we organized Taliban-led militancy against NATO forces in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So I think we should take advantage of this thing, Afghan mediation throughout the peace process.
Right. Tom, you were nodding your head at that, and I want to understand whether or not you agree with the fact that this particular influence on the TTP is actually going to come through.
And I want to add another question to it, Tom, if you can allow. Obviously, you someone who hawking upon South Asia. Just wanted to know, recently we saw a drone attack on Al-Qaeda leadership. Can we see more drone attacks only on Al-Qaeda leaderships, or you can include TTP and ISIS Khorasan leaderships as well?
I would say certainly ISIS Khorasan, certainly Al-Qaeda. TTP, we've not seen that level of coordination from the U.S. yet. I would not preclude it. I think it's something they're looking for. The U.S., especially the Biden administration right now, is looking to show off its over-the-horizon capabilities to justify withdrawing from Afghanistan. They want to demonstrate they can still target militant leaders that specifically pose a security threat to U.S., to the United States and U.S. citizens. So we'll have to see if that extends to TTP as well. But I do think that certainly it's something that could be on the agenda. Now, as far as the game of influence going around across the various militant groups in the region, I think it really is up to TTP to make a choice whether they're serious about pursuing diplomatic talks. You know, we could debate about what happened with withdrawal of Afghanistan and the fallout of that, but the Afghan Taliban did certainly make a choice that they would go through with the peace process, and they did, and they succeeded from that. TTP is now extremely emboldened by the Afghan Taliban victory next door, and they've said before that we've defeated the enemy here, we could defeat the enemy next door, and that's Pakistan they're talking about. So are they serious about engaging in peace, or do they feel they have so much leverage right now that they can just essentially sort of influence this debate, this conversation to the point where they think they'll get all that they want? Now, it doesn't seem that Khorasani, who was recently killed, was playing a very constructive role in these talks, and we know these groups are not monoliths. There are inner rifts with them. There's diplomats and there's generals. So it's interesting to see which side will win over in the end.
Right. And Tom, when we talk about the killing of Khorasani and other such leaders, does this in any way appease the US or other Western powers, no matter who's responsible for such attacks? Because, of course, one of the issues with the current regime in Afghanistan was also whether or not Afghanistan sword is going to be used against any other territory. And the groups that currently exist in Afghanistan still continue to pose a threat to peace in the region as well as internationally as well. And as far as perceptions are concerned, that's what's been put forward as well. So does this attack, is it a cause of celebration in other parts of the world?
I think it is. I'm not sure of any country that's really supporting TTP's goals explicitly when it comes to the instability in this part of the region. I think the U.S., especially, as I mentioned before, is looking for the deaths of these senior officials of these militant groups because, again, it shows that the U.S., especially for the Biden administration, the U.S. did not need an on-the-ground presence, protracted one there, to have these people be killed, essentially. And we're seeing these people die now without any U.S. troops on the ground. So I think there's certainly some celebration within the U.S. side of things. And I'm sure that's the same for the international community, especially regional powers. We've seen countries in the region, some regional blocs, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for instance, talking about a need to coordinate more closely on security and counterterrorism. So it would certainly be interesting to see the details of how this operation played out, who was responsible, and what factions really were at play here and played a critical role. But I think that certainly this is something that's welcomed, and I would imagine that this would be a call for further cooperation among regional countries.
Right.
Tariq, if we talk about obviously, in the region, terrorism, of course, still there are two provinces of Afghanistan. I earlier mentioned Kunar and Nangarhar province. Still, there is a presence of ISIS Khorasan. If we talk about IMU, it's present there. If we talk about, ETIM, it's there. If we talk about, BLA, BLF factions, they are there as well. So don't you think that it is time for Taliban to realize that these, factions, they can become a menace for Afghanistan in coming future, and especially for Taliban as well?
And Mr. Farhadi, when we talk about Taliban realizing something, or we talk about what or who can have an influence over the Taliban, I want to understand how much of that is true. To what extent does anybody or anything has an influence, or when we're talking about them realizing something, what really are going to be the factors for that actually to happen?
Okay, so for Taliban, these groups are not seen a danger to them because the numbers in each one of these groups are very small. TTP in thousands of people, the other groups also so small groups. They don't see them as a risk for themselves. They have to realize that they are a risk to their reputation. That's the step that we need to get to. We Afghans, through media interviews in Afghanistan, we are trying to split up the Taliban and find the ones that can be convinced that, look, it's because of these activities and these groups and these sheltering Al-Qaeda, which is anyways a moribund organization, but sheltering in a guest house, Haqqani guest house, was not the convenient thing to do, that now the money that's stuck in the United States cannot come back. In Afghanistan, the economic situation is really, really dire situation. Afghanistan doesn't have the authorization to print new currency. And the currency they are using is so old that it's not usable anymore. I just had an interview with Afghan media here, and they are saying what to do. I said, look, currency has been printed in Poland, but because of the American sanctions, it will not come to Afghanistan. And now it will come even less. The possibility is completely deleted because anybody in the US would say that if we give any type of money to the Taliban, it might end up in the hands of other terror groups because of their symbiotic relationship. So what we need to do is also to split the Taliban on this issue and convince some of the Taliban that if you want to now take off and succeed as a regime economically, you have to go through actions that increase the chance of reduction of sanctions, because right now even with the sight of seeing Al-Qaeda, the U.S. Treasury had given some licenses to some humanitarian organizations to be able to import humanitarian goods to Afghanistan, but the banks just read Al-Qaeda and they say, no, licenses, we don't want to hear, we don't want to deal with Afghanistan. This is going to really damage
right. Let me just get a clarification for Farhadi, Mr. Farhadi first. Mr. Farhadi, you talked about these groups not presenting a threat to the Taliban, or at least them thinking so, and a threat of reputation existing. But isn't it in the current situation, as you're mentioning, and it's of course a huge amounts of suffering for the people of Afghanistan, and the future seems bleak as well if things continue the same way. Isn't the threat to reputation also a really big one? And is that not motivation enough for the Taliban regime to do something about these groups?
Especially when, if we talk about, in March, we had a statement coming from MI5 head, Ken McCallum. He said that there are people who are offering vulnerable people of Afghanistan with the money from $280 to $420 to join ISIS Khorasan. Wouldn't it be a threat for Taliban?
It would be a threat because a few number of people can create attacks in schools and mosques and soft targets. But the Taliban also sort of ignore that, and they say, yes, these were Khawarijs, that means the people who have come out of the ranks, etc. They minimize them. And inside their ranks, the reality is that 7 or 8 years ago, these people were fighting together. But now the Taliban know that they are not going to turn against the Taliban. Well, we have to convince some Taliban that now they have to come out of the mindset of a militia which was fighting America, and they have to adopt a mindset of statesmen, and how to convince these people to disarm and go back to their countries or do something non-harmful to the international community, and the Taliban to be able to reduce the sanctions on Afghanistan so that the famine and the fact that the donors are very busy with Ukraine and there's not enough money now, even for the WFP and the UNICEF and these organizations to distribute. We have lines in Afghanistan in front of bakeries of women who are waiting for 2 pieces of bread. It's heartbreaking for all the Afghans to see, and we are trying to tell the Taliban, look, your actions by sheltering these micro groups here and there really perpetuates this situation of poverty for everybody in Afghanistan. And if poverty persists in Afghanistan, there will be a wave of migration towards Iran and Pakistan again.
Right, right. You talk about, of course, the change of mindset, and Mr. Hassan, whenever we talk about such things as to what should happen or such changes, they seem really big words to me for the Taliban to change their mindset to being a statesman, and also big changes, with all due respect, Mr. Pradi, but I'm just trying to understand. And when we talk about it may be necessary and it may be the best way out possible, or maybe the most fundamental change that is required, but can we afford to wait for that? Do we have time for that? Isn't the urgency of this situation demanding something else? Because changes in mindset takes ages, perhaps decades, and even more so. And right now, Afghanistan is really suffering. So, Mr. Hassan, what options do we have right now at the table? I mean, can we wait for that?
Yes, exactly. You know, so far we have not seen any change in the Taliban mindset, but we must also keep one thing in mind, that Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, it's an ideological force. So for them, ideology is having like the prime priority to decide stuff on ground or in policy formulation. And we have seen this thing on multiple occasions, especially regarding the ban on girls' education. Like the Supreme Leader, when he addressed Ulma Jirga in Kabul, so he made it very clearly that even if someone drops an atom bomb on Afghanistan, we won't change our stance. And he also urged Taliban leadership and the Taliban cabinet that stop looking towards West or begging from the West for money. So better concentrate on your own revenue generation. So this is their mindset, and we must keep this thing in mind. And we have also seen this thing regarding the TTP. Affiliation with the TTP or Al-Qaeda or IMU and other militant organization, that they are hosting them, considering it as a religious responsibility, as a religious duty. So ideology plays a very important role in their decision-making process.
Right.
Yeah, Tom, if we talk about, of course, ISIS Khorasan and TTP and all of these, don't you think they are a constant threat for the West as well, because they have always been considered as a breeding ground for Daesh? And of course, Daesh is a phenomenon that is constantly a time bomb ticking for the West as well. So wouldn't it be good that Western powers, especially America, helps out Pakistan and helps out the neighboring countries and helps out Taliban to fight against this menace?
Absolutely, and I think in principle that is the U.S. position. Of course, there are always going to be long-standing concerns in Washington regarding Pakistan's relationship to some of the groups in the region, so there has been a bit of an arm's distance approach there, especially in recent years. I think that especially also with rise of blocs, as I mentioned before, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the U.S. strained relations with China and Russia also play some sort of a role in why the U.S. maybe has not been more proactive in this. But I think it does also come back to supporting the Taliban in some way to make the decisions they need to fight these groups. And we have to look into their mindset about risk and reward. Right now, the risk is if they do turn on these groups, they risk the internal schisms, the internal defections, and if they're not viewed as legitimate international government anyway by the rest of the international community, then they will receive no support. So there needs to be some sort of incentive that these groups are not worth protecting, they're not worth defending or sheltering, and that if they do succeed in some way in taking on these groups, then they will be somewhat rewarded, because there's no appetite left for any more war against the Afghan Taliban themselves. They've shown an incredible resilience to economic sanctions, and there's no way to really punish them anymore economically without further pushing Afghanistan and its people toward crisis. So there needs to be some sort of working regime put in place between both the West and especially regional governments towards the Afghan Taliban, whether we like it or not, because this is the situation we have now, when it's between a rock and a hard place. But the Taliban have shown some sort of willingness to work with the international community. They not mostly privately they've done it, but still there seems to be a transfer mechanism there if the right people are spoken to within the Taliban to do so. And I think the U.S. should do more to play a role when it comes to supporting not just that, but also Pakistan's ability to be able to facilitate those sort of relationships and strategy.
Yeah.
Right. Faisal, I want to come back to the peace talks between Pakistan and TTP as well, since, of course, it's a matter of huge concern for Pakistan and the kind of terrorist attacks that we've seen recently as well. When we look at this particular situation and the way Afghanistan is evolving, the way we have seen the Taliban regime act, how much do you think that we're going to, moving further, be able to rely on the Taliban regime and their support in these talks? And then when we talk about the talks themselves and the kind of deadlocks they've seen in the past, how much more are we going to take this forward, and what sort of measures or factors do you think can still play in the possibility of us achieving some sort of success?
Sana, if we talk about, of course, talking with TTP with the help of Taliban, yes, we can, but to some extent, as Ehsan earlier mentioned very rightly, that if we look at the last 20 years, of course, both of these groups, they have sheltered each other, they have supported each other for a long time. So, of course, Taliban would never want anything bad for TTP, and they are giving sort of providing a chance for Pakistan to talk with them, and they are providing them with a chance to talk with Pakistan at the same time, but their demands are not acceptable to Pakistan at all. And I think Taliban need to understand this, that if they have some influence on TTP, by all means they have to use it, because end of the day you can never change your neighbors, and Pakistan is going to be their neighbor forever, and they need to look into it from that angle, that if they want a constant peace in their own country, and if they want Pakistan to have peace in Pakistan, then of course they need to be very positive about it, and they have to do all it takes to make it possible. But right now, of course, there is a lot that Taliban can do which they are not doing, and they must do, because end of the day it is going to be a benefit for them. They need to know that the people we are dealing with, the TTP, of course, they do not accept Constitution of Pakistan, they do not accept the writ of the government in the area they are concerned about, they do not accept Pakistan's sovereignty. So if they are not doing it, then of course till the day they don't do it, they are our enemies.
And as Tom was saying, after Khorasani's death, there may be a certain change in who takes the talks forward. How is that going to impact the talks? And do you think that that can actually change some sort of possibilities? Faisal?
Sorry, it was?
Any possibilities do you think that will come if there is any change in who takes the talk forward after Khorasani's death?
It would be very difficult. Why I say this? Because right now the things are shaping up very differently. That is why you saw my first stance as soon as the program started. My stance was very blunt. In previous times, you must have seen my stance. It was of the negotiations, it was of the talks, but right now, of course, things are very different on ground, and I think Ehsan has pointed out earlier, very rightly, the things are very different, and I don't see anything, coming out positive out of it.
Right. Mr. Farhadi, based on your understanding and your experience, can you also help us understand whether there is something that is lacking in our understanding of taking these talks forward, or the way that our understanding should shift when we're dealing with these talks and dealing with the TTP? Is there something else that we still haven't tried, and especially considering the double game by the Taliban regime that you were earlier referring to, what do you think, or what would you recommend Pakistan to be able to do differently for any sort of success in these talks? Is there something that we can change?
I think it has already happened. The Corps Commander for Peshawar was changed. That means that the strategy on dealing with Taliban is going to slightly change going forward, because the Corps Commander Peshawar has a regional view on this issue. And these, in the next few weeks and months, we will see changes. We will see also splits between the Taliban on this issue of whether it is really wise to support these micro groups based on the friendship that they had before, or should they also play real politics and get legitimacy more from the international community? The Taliban crave legitimacy from the international community. They would like that. And we are playing that in our interviews in Afghan media, because before the Taliban were in the fighting zone, we didn't have access to talk to them. But now, every couple of days, we're in debates with them on Kabul TVs in local languages. And us from the outside, the presenters ask them these questions, and they say, so now you want to be leading the country, can't you really give priority to the issues of poverty? There was a report yesterday on the news that in northern Afghanistan, babies are being born on 7 months term because the mother doesn't have enough to eat. The mother doesn't have enough to eat. The mother has to go to a neighbor's house to get a piece of bread, and they are under stress, and it's because of hunger and stress that they have premature births. These things are happening because the sanctions are still on Afghanistan. These things are happening because even the middle class in Afghanistan now is jobless. There is no investment. The sanctions have played a negative tour on attracting investments to Afghanistan. The Taliban are giving us messages as saying, how can we attract messages to Afghanistan? And I, in public interviews, I say, look, as long as we are ostracized by the international community for protecting terror groups, and it's on the front page of the newspaper, nobody wants to come and invest in Afghanistan, not even the Afghans, because you don't even have an investment law.
Tom, talking about the first step forward, of course, can we say that if America lifts bit of sanctions over Taliban, they can consider it a first step forward from American side, and of course the demands Americans had from them for not catering any kind of not letting the Afghan soil being used for the terrorism. They will be working on it very seriously in future, because even if we talk about Taliban, right now Taliban are countering in their country a humanitarian crisis as well.
Yeah, I think that certainly that the Taliban would take that seriously. I think the more difficult obstacles right now are the other demands that the U.S. has, which are related to the Taliban's political decisions as far as the makeup of the government and various ministry posts, head of banking systems, for example. The U.S. would like to see a greater diversity there. I'm not sure that's something that's going to be attainable in the short term, given the precarious situation Afghanistan is still facing. The Taliban are still very much in a defensive mode. I'm still very much trying to build the country. It's about to be the first anniversary only of their takeover. A year is not a very long time to establish a government, especially essentially from scratch. So it's something that I think is very difficult for the U.S. to understand and for the Afghan Taliban to understand. But there has to be some sort of compromise here, because there's not going to be any progress in Afghanistan without more money, without investment, as was said. And I think that it would be an important step to establishing some sort of working relationship, even let it be unofficial for now. We could talk about recognition later, but at least towards some sort of working relationship. Again, not because the U.S. has to endorse the Taliban or the Islamic Emirate, because there needs to be some sort of measures taken to help the Afghan people. If that's what the U.S. mission was all along, then that's probably the best way they could do it now, is to work through the resources they have on the ground. Again, whether they like it or not, this is the government that's in power now, and there's no appetite to remove them.
Right. Thank you so much, Tom and Mr. Farhadi, for joining us in the debate. It's always a pleasure having you both on the show. We're going to be concluding our segment very soon, but before that, Mr. Hassan, I'll take your last comments on this as well. Of course, there's so much that Pakistan can do or change or act differently, but of course, negotiations are not one-sided, and we really need to, of course, expect a lot from the TTP as well. Do you think that moving forward, as Mr. Farhadi earlier was talking about, we will be seeing a positive change?
Yes, as I earlier said, the things are still very much mature on ground. But Mr. Tariq pointed out a very key point that with the transfer of Corps Commander Peshawar, so there we might see some kind of a delay in the peace process, because as per my information, there were quite a progress on the peace process on the draft of the agreement, even on the draft of the agreement. But with the transfer of Corps Commander Peshawar, so the new Corps Commander will certainly take some time to understand the phenomenon of this entire peace process.
Right.
So I think things might get delayed for some time.
All right. Well, of course, we hope to see positive change sooner rather than later, change for the people in Afghanistan and for the people in Pakistan as well, and for these terrorist attacks to subside, and that for the peace talks to actually bring in some positive and tangible results so that we can all be more peaceful and hope for better days to come. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.